The AI can analyze how the conversation went, how the tutoring interaction went, and then give personalized feedback to the tutor, often encouraging them to have changed their talking ratio and spend
Right.
more time listening and asking questions of their learners.
Welcome to Edtech Insiders, the top podcast covering the education technology industry. From funding rounds to impact to AI developments across early childhood, K-12, higher ed, and work, you'll find it all here at Edtech Insiders.
Remember to subscribe to the pod, check out our newsletter, and also our event calendar. And to go deeper, check out Edtech Insiders Plus, where you can get premium content, access to our WhatsApp channel, early access to events, and back channel insights from Alex and Ben. Hope you enjoyed today's pod.
We have a very special guest today for our interview. We are here with Drew Bent, who leads education as part of Anthropic's Beneficial Deployments team. He also co-founded the tutoring nonprofit Schoolhouse.world with Sal Khan. And prior to that, he wrote code at Khan Academy, taught high school math, and has been tutoring students for over a decade. Drew has degrees in physics and computer science from MIT and an education master's from Stanford. Not bad, Drew. Nice to see you. Great to see you again.
And
welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you. So first, let's talk about Claude for education. Anthropic is obviously frontier model, has been doing incredible work. I personally use it every day and talk into it just as a partner for everything I do. But Anthropic has put a lot of energy into education. Tell us about why Anthropic has chosen to focus on education as one of its first major real-world applications. And what does that mean for your team and what you're building?
Of course. Yeah, I'm happy to share why we've started this Claude for Education initiative. I think taking a step back, it's a fair question about why any of the AI labs are focused on education in the first place.
Yeah.
I can't speak to other labs, but what I can share from the Anthropic perspective is it was late last year that we were looking at the data of how Claude was being used overall around the world. You may not be surprised to learn that coding was the top use case, but 2 out of the top 4 use cases, so right below there, were education related, learning and teaching, academic research.
Yep.
And so I think this was really important for our team to see because we built this general purpose technology, but we care not just about building the technology, but about the responsible deployment of it and how it gets used. And here it's getting used all throughout education by students and by teachers. And there's all sorts of hopes that we've all had in the edtech field for what AI can do to education. But we also know there's a lot of concerns. And so this is, for us, primarily an exercise in thinking about the societal impact of our technology and what can we do to be more responsible stewards of this technology. And I think it's very easy to just put the blame and the burden on, why are students using it to cheat in these cases, or why are teachers automating parts of their jobs in these cases? But really, we have a responsibility as the AI labs, Anthropic and all the other ones, that if we have a technology that's being used by millions of people in this way, that we have to first study it and then figure out what we can do to make it better for these educational purposes.
100%. And, as part of that work, you've just put out in April, Anthropic's education report where you looked at how students are actually using it. And you have a really interesting taxonomy of sort of how you put it together. You have this direct work versus collaborative work, problem solving versus sort of asking for output. Tell us a little bit about the findings from that report and what was surprising or counterintuitive for you about how students are using Claude and Anthropic for education.
So this April education report that you're talking about here was our first attempt, and we will have more research on this, so stay tuned, to study how, in this case, students are using Claude. Yeah. We thought it was really important to share some empirical data and to, frankly, make this open source and share it with the public. Because there's been a lot of studies, of course, around how students and teachers are using AI. There's been sort of small maybe RCTs and sort of smaller case studies. But we, of course, have access to a lot of data. And because we have this privacy preserving tool where we're able to study, 500,000 conversations without looking at any individual conversation, the interesting part of this is that we have Claude itself go analyze all the conversations, summarize them, bring it up, and then the humans review at the end. We were able to share this data. And there were lots of great use cases, right, of people using it to build, their own projects and artifacts with Claude, practicing for oral exams in school and all of these things. But importantly, there were also a lot of these worrisome use cases that people have been wondering about, but we could see it at scale on our platform. And we would love all the AI labs to share similar types of data, because I don't think this is specific to us.
No.
And so as you mentioned, we had to figure out a way to categorize this. It's hard if you just look at the AI conversation data to know exactly the context in which a student's using it. Are they asking, help on a particular question for a homework problem, for an exam they're preparing for, just some self-learning they're doing? So that's why we built that taxonomy that you mentioned. And actually, I will say you and Ben were very helpful as we reached out initially to you all to get a sense of what are the existing taxonomies out there to study what student usage looks like of these AI tools. And we really couldn't find one that encompassed what we were looking for. So that's why we built this new one in sort of a bottoms up way.
Yeah.
But the part that I want to pull out is Bloom's taxonomy, which many of your educators, listening to this will have thought about in a classroom context. And, I was a former teacher, high school math teacher. And I was often thinking about this taxonomy of these, cognitive skills that I want my students to work their way up from just simply, recalling a fact and remembering it all the way up to being able to analyze and create their own knowledge.
Right.
And so what we did is we took all of these conversations and we actually sort of flipped it and said, can we analyze Claude's behavior in these conversations with students to see how well it's exhibiting different parts of the Bloom's taxonomy? What we found surprised us, which is that it was an inverted pyramid where Claude was often performing these top cognitive skills like creating and analyzing way more than it was at the bottom of the pyramid. And so from a Turing test perspective, wow, this technology is incredible. But from a, cognitive offloading perspective, it started to raise concerns about, well, if the students are not, if they're able to work with an AI and have the AI exhibit these top cognitive domains, then what does that mean for their own thinking? The good news is that if a student and Claude are co-creating, they can both be at that top level of creating together. But it doesn't necessarily happen out of the box. So that's what we have to think about when we think about our own product development is how do we encourage that? And then one last thing I'll say on this is there was one gap in this pyramid where Claude was not doing a lot of it, which is evaluating. So Claude itself was not necessarily evaluating a lot of things, but that is where the humans, of course, and when we think about like AI fluency and what does it mean to be a good user of AI or collaborator of AI in 2025, being able to evaluate the output is so important. So when we work with students and teachers, it's often focusing on that competency.
It also makes sense because the sort of built-in behaviors of, especially in sort of general purpose mode of the frontier models, including Claude, are not to evaluate. If a student comes in and says, I'm thinking this and this, I want to write a paper and here's my thesis. It's not sort of designed to be like, I'm not sure that's a great thesis. I'm evaluating it and I think you could do better. That's sort of not, so it makes sense that the evaluation is sort of the weak link in the taxonomy,
and
just because that's not
the
what's designed.
The key point as well is that like LLMs were originally built to be answer machines.
Exactly.
Answer questions. But great tutors and teachers don't just give answers, and neither should LLMs in the educational context. And so that is the key thing that, we have been, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but that we've been working on in our learning mode that we released last April. And there's a lot of these learning modes that we're starting to see. And
that's right.
All of this is trying to say, this technology wasn't built for the education purpose. It's being used so much. It has so much potential, but we need to help pull out these strong Socratic pedagogical behaviors. So that more students can access that.
Exactly. So, I mean, it must be such an interesting role being inside Anthropic and really focusing on education because Anthropic is truly cutting edge, world class, one of the very, very few, frontier LLM creators that can compete with absolutely anything. It's an incredible, tool and set of models and all of these things. But it isn't necessarily custom built for education. It, in fact, is not built for education by nature. How do you sort of balance the general purpose answering machine power of LLMs at Anthropic with safe, useful, tools for learning in the classroom? I think this is like it must be such a tricky push and pull trying to think of how to put the pieces together in a way that isn't an answer machine, that is actually, pedagogically sound and can actually help students think and not, offload, as they like to say, or outsource their critical thinking. How do you balance it?
It's a great question. And I will say we are custom building it now for education because
Right.
we realize that this is an area we have to prioritize. But to your point, we are an AI lab first and foremost, and we
Yeah.
are many technologists here. We also realize it's important to have teachers. I mentioned I was in the classroom. We have a lot of teachers here at Anthropic, particularly working on these initiatives. And so I think you're starting to see this at other AI labs as well. And I think it's great. I think when all the AI labs start to hire more former teachers, educators, people who've worked in Edtech, that's really important. Of course, there's a lot of stuff happening at the application layer, and we have a lot of amazing Edtech organizations that build on top of our API that go much deeper into particular use cases in the classroom. Magic schools of the world use Claude. And a lot of them love it because of the strong focus on privacy and all of the guardrails that come with API. So all of that's really important. But I think it's also important to have some of these educators in the AI labs themselves, because even when you do have these specific tools for education, you will still find that people come onto Claude or these other chatbots, the general purpose tool, and ask education questions of it. So this doesn't direct answer question about how to deal with that tension, other than we deal with the tension all the time of, some people are trying to use things in a productivity perspective. Even teachers, sometimes they just, they want to create a syllabus for their class as a first pass that they can then, revise. And so having a Socratic dialogue for a teacher who's trying to create a syllabus may not be the best format. They may just want to create some output that will be helpful for their class. So there's always this question around how do you encourage people to have more of this like active learning while also meeting them where they're at.
Yeah. It's a fascinating tension. I think your point about sort of where does the learning layer happen? Is it happening within the core model, or is it happening within the application layer, like
Or
a magic
both.
school, or what is happening at what level is something continuously being sort of balanced and measured, and EdTech is a huge part of that. And you've been a teacher, a tutor, a nonprofit founder. You're working at Khan Academy. You're even in the EdTech world, and you mentioned a lot of educators and EdTech veterans work at Anthropic, which is amazing to hear. We've also talked to, Shantanu Sinha, one of the co-founders of Khan Academy, who now is doing Google AI.
It's a good friend. Yeah.
Right. Tell us how your personal experience is. You said a tutor for over a decade. I have that experience too. A teacher. How do they influence the way that you personally look at designing and testing the learning capabilities and features at Claude? What do you bring from those experiences that I think that you feel like add to the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can relate to this if through all your tutoring and my tutoring as well. All of those identities of being a teacher, a tutor, working on an ed tech nonprofit, all of that are, key to how I see the world. But
Yeah.
the tutoring one in particular, I think is, especially in this like idealistic one-on-one tutoring interaction, which I love. If you can get the time to just work one-on-one with the student, really support them, is like, it's just so precious.
It
And so
is.
often in the classroom, you're trying to approximate some of that, right, as a teacher. But one thing that you realize from tutoring is that if you ask a student, and I did this a lot in my classroom, where I would ask my middle and high schoolers to peer tutor each other,
Yeah.
and often their initial instinct was to go explain the concept in depth to their fellow student. and they would spend 90% of the time talking, and then they would ask some questions, and then the person they were tutoring, the tutee, would spend 10% of their time talking. But then when you look at the research and you look at just some amazing tutors, it's exactly flipped. And it is pretty painful and hard to do well. But if you have someone where the tutor is talking 20% of the time and the student that they're tutoring is talking 80% of the time, and then you start to see maybe some of the Socratic dialogue, but not just that, but really trying to get that ratio right, as at least as a proxy. That's really important. And so when we're working on Schoolhouse.world, a similar type of thing. It's like, how do we teach that skill to the tutors? We have 15,000 high school tutors around the world tutoring. So we're trying to teach that. What's interesting now is in an AI lab, it's also like, how do we get that behavior in the AI as well?
Exactly.
Because the AI also will talk. All the LLMs will talk a lot. They can talk. Yep. But again, with the right prompting and with the right product affordances, and if it's not just solely a chatbot, but if you have Claude artifacts and all of these different interactive elements as well, where students can be co-creating. We see students even using Claude Code. And so there it's much more of a conversation back and forth. But I think that's like an element that I've just had with my own one-on-one tutoring experiences that then was relevant in teaching, relevant in Schoolhouse.world, and now relevant at Anthropic.
You make such a good point. And it's funny, yeah, I've been playing with the different study modes and learning modes in all of the frontier models. And you're right, something I don't think I would have noticed it until you said it, but it's really true. Even in the learning modes, they're very garrulous, right? They sort of, you say one thing and it sort of gives you a whole slew. It's like, well, here's a whole bunch of ways to think about that. Which one are you interested in? And you could do this or this or this, or let me explain it. And I know it's better than, the learning modes are better than the off the shelf general.
But it's still too much.
But it's still too much.
Right.
And it's so funny. We always get the transcripts of all of these podcasts, and a personal goal for myself is to sort of talk as little as possible in these. And I never connected it to tutoring, but I think you're right. The best tutors do a lot of listening and not that much talking, if they can, as much as possible. So I really,
I like when you talk. It's a conversation. So don't be too hard on yourself if the ratio in this conversation looks different, because it is a conversation. But I hear your point. Yeah.
I appreciate that. True, it is a conversation. But I think job interviews are another example of when the more that the interviewer speaks, it's not always that's good usually for the candidate if the interviewer is speaking more. It's a wacky situation. So you mentioned Schoolhouse.world. It's built all around peer tutoring. It's built around human connection. I'm curious, as you think about sort of the future of Anthropic and Claude. You just announced a new model this week. There's also I want to give a little pitch for. There's a new Andrew Ng class, for deep learning about Claude Code, which is by all accounts, the absolute cutting edge, best coding tool. I'm not a coder myself, so I can't speak to it, but I've heard that from many, many people. Lots of great stuff happening in
Claude
Anthropic.
Code makes everyone a coder. So after this, you and I can hack on something together.
Let's do it. Let's do some.
But to your point, I'll
but when you looked at the sort of future of AI tutoring or AI conversations, do you think there's going to be an opportunity for AI to support more social and multi-human interactions? I think that none of us want a future where every student is only interacting directly with a computer. We've seen some edtech startups that start to bring facilitation or small group support or multi tutoring for multiple kids at the same time. They've done it at the application layer. I'm curious if it's something you ever think about at the foundational layer.
I agree 100%. That's the goal. The goal is to have more human-to-human interaction and more quality human-to-human interaction. Yes. And I can speak to when I co-founded Schoolhouse.world with Sal Khan, Shashir, Mariah, like all of us. Our key insight here was that human-to-human interaction is at the core of education. And a lot of people were craving it on Khan Academy of like, how do I chat with Sal after he does one of the videos? Exactly. I want to have this conversation. And that's hard to scale up. And so with Schoolhouse.world, it was about how can we create this entirely free peer-to-peer volunteer tutoring system where we could connect, many thousands of students to have these human-to-human interactions. And then, of course, AI came out and we started to use AI, but it was often behind the scenes. It was using the AI to, for example, and we still do this now at Schoolhouse, we record the conversations, save them for 30 days, and then from these tutoring interactions, and then the AI can analyze how the conversation went, how the tutoring interaction went, and then give personalized feedback to the tutor, often encouraging them to have changed their talking ratio and spend more time listening and asking questions of their learners. So that's a great example of an AI model encouraging humans to spend more time with each other. And now it's the same thing with Anthropic. And this is a big part of my reason to also come to Anthropic. A lot of alignment with the values of Anthropic, but one of them being, it's in our name, Anthropic. The human element matters a lot here. And so when we see, for example, teachers using, Claude, some of the top use cases are helping them do sort of administrative tasks and things that would have taken them hours before, so that they can then spend more time like in office hours with students. Same with the students, like we see them, learning about a concept on Claude. Of course, you are interacting with an AI there, but the ideal thing is then you can come into the classroom and spend more time on hands-on projects, working with other students. So this is easier said than done. I'm not trying to like trivialize this, because if you do build a technology and it is very powerful, like people will use it a lot, but the goal is not to have everyone spend all their time in the AI. It's really to like open up and free their time to have more of these human to human interactions.
100%. I mean, one use case, I was brainstorming with Claude about this for a while at one point, and we were thinking about different ways that AI could support facilitation. And, something as simple as, when you have a small group breakout, AI could be the one that do all the icebreakers and keep people on task and help help make sure that everybody is aware of the instructions and what their roles are, and sort of keeping things moving. Like, there's a lot of really interesting opportunities for AI to sort of serve as a facilitator for multiple people and make peer learning into something that's just really rich and exciting. Almost like they can almost be like a dungeon master, in a learning experience where it sort of is slightly, it's not. It's just guiding everybody, but they're still working together, conversing, talking. It's a really exciting model. So I want to ask more about the Claude's learning mode. It's been really interesting, and it was inspired by real student behavior. You obviously, as you said, you did aggregated data analyses to see how students were using Claude. Can you walk us through that sort of process of taking all of that data that you were finding from how students were using Claude for direct output, for collaboration, and sort of baked it into this product feature about these learning projects and this learning mode?
So yeah, we released our learning mode this past spring after we saw a lot of the data from our research at the quantitative level in terms of studying these 500,000 conversations of Claude, and we saw the need for the ability for Claude to not just answer questions, but also to ask you questions and to have the Socratic dialogue and all the best practices that teachers and tutors know, but to bring that into Claude.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we also did a lot of case or like focus groups. And people would often think that it was the teachers that were telling us, oh, you need the learning mode. And we did, of course, hear this from teachers, like, they want what's best for their students' long-term learning. And so they were worried about cheating. And so learning mode was helpful there. But it was the specific moment, I can remember the conversation we had was with a focus group of college students. Yeah. They were the ones who I think first maybe even coined the term learning mode. And they were worried, and they are worried about brain rot. And that's the way they frame it.
Interesting.
And of course, it makes sense. And I think students know what's best for themselves, but there's always this challenge of what's best for their long-term learning. And then in the short term, it's late at night and they need to get ready for finish some assignment. And if the tools make it so easy for them to just steer in the direction of just using, the AI as a crutch, then we will all do that, not just students, adults as well.
Sure.
But it was very promising. That was, students also want to have these product affordances and product features that encourage more of learning. And so that's what we've been working on. And I'll just say, like, I've been very delighted to see that all of the AI labs, and we weren't the first, and we are not the last either. There's been a lot over the last few months that have been working on different types of learning modes in OpenAI and Gemini. And for us, we call that race to the top, where we think, especially in an area like education or beneficial deployments, like having a competitive pressure for all of the AI labs to be doing more in education, more research around it, more product features to support learning, and really working directly with students and teachers to build these features. Like that's really good.
Yeah.
So it's very different maybe from other areas of industry. Like but this is a general principle at Anthropic: race to the top, not race to the bottom.
I love it. Yeah, and it's also something comes out of the school policy, the school policy. But it's true. I've felt that as well from my perch, looking at these tools from the outside. Is it feels like the idea of there being a competitive, who can have the best learning mode, the best AI tutor, the best, conversational, constructive, reducing brain rot and incorporating learning science. Like what an amazing competition to have.
This is a great. This is a great universe that we're in right now.
Exactly. It's a good timeline where all of these amazing big tech companies who frankly can focus on anything are focusing on education. Let's talk quickly about the research and the learning science. I know I only have you for a few more minutes, but this is something I'm so curious about. We saw in Google's case, they did this very specific thing where they made this Learn LM, this sort of model for education, and then folded it back into Core Gemini, and then it became sort of the orientation that fuels their learning products. And I would imagine that Anthropic without giving any industry secrets away, I'm not asking for them, but, I'm curious how you think about getting the research. You mentioned Socratic dialogue or, just some of the Bloom's taxonomy, some of the things that we know about learning science from the research and tutors know, how are you thinking about getting that into the mind frame of Anthropic's, into Claude's sort of personality when it comes to learning mode?
Yeah, I think the answer is all of the above. There's some stuff at the model level, making sure that these models have been trained on not just question answer productivity use cases, but thinking about things that also make sense for the education context.
Yeah.
Then there's stuff at the prompting level, which you see all of these learn modes that you've mentioned, I think have some pretty key part at the prompting level, which is, again, we found that 5%, just throw out a number there, maybe 5% or so of our students were using Claude in these very sophisticated ways and turning it into Socratic tutor type of interactions. But not everyone is taking the time to write a long, lengthy system prompt. So that's where I think the AI labs can help a lot. And then there's stuff at the product level as well to like how to surface that. So it's all of the above. And I think, Google with Learn LM, they've been doing this for a while, I think is a great example for the broader field.
Yeah, that's a really great distinction. It happens within multiple aspects of the experience, with the prompting, with the product, with the model, and you can sort of put all the pieces together. And I'm just excited to see it continue to evolve. It's really exciting. Learning mode in Anthropic is really great, and it's so exciting that in the last few weeks we've seen several of the major model providers and labs present their version of learning mode, and now it's just race to the top.
I'll preview something that's actually coming shortly. I don't know if it'll come before or after this gets released, but we've a lot of people you mentioned use Claude Code and Claude for coding. Yeah. And so we hear this a lot on the programming, the CS student side, and really just everyone, junior programmers, people in industry, saying, I don't want my programming skills to atrophy. I don't want to lose that. Or if I'm learning for the first time, like how do I learn when a coding agent can do 20 minutes of a task? And so the little teaser here is that we will shortly be launching a learning mode for Claude Code as well. And so I think this is, like all these other learning modes, it's just the start. Like we need to iterate on this, and we've been getting a lot of feedback. We need more feedback. But I think this is going to be really, really important when everyone is asking, well, what about someone who's learning to program? Should they learn to program? How can they learn to program? And so we're thinking about this at the level of all of our different product surfaces.
That's incredible. And that's exactly how it should be. You can jump right into creating your own applications without having to know how to code yet, but then you should be learning along the way, because if you're just letting the tools do it for you, you're not learning how to do it yourself. So that's very, very exciting news, and we'll see if the dates work out. But hopefully that will be out by the time this podcast is out, and we will link to it in the show notes. If not, that's something to look forward to very soon. That's really exciting. Drew Bent, this has been a pleasure. You're welcome back anytime. I'm literally a daily user of Claude. I use it for almost everything. And Drew Bent leads education as part of Anthropic's beneficial deployments. He was also the co-founder of the tutoring nonprofit Schoolhouse with Sal Khan. Really exciting work. And thank you so much for being here with us on EdTech Insiders.
Thanks so much, Alex. Big fan of the podcast. It's an honor to be here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of EdTech Insiders. If you like the podcast, remember to rate it and share it with others in the EdTech community. For those who want even more EdTech Insider, subscribe to the free EdTech Insiders newsletter on Substack.